I can still remember the moment my phone lit up with that message, the one that burned itself into my memory like acid on paper. Stay away from us. I don't even know who you are anymore. The words came from Rachel, my baby sister, the girl I once walked to the bus stop and defended on the playground. But in that instant, all I felt was a hollowness so deep, it made the air heavy. The accusation behind it wasn't hers alone. It carried Derek's fingerprints, the man she planned to marry, the man I had never trusted. That single text was the crack in the dam, and once it appeared, nothing in our family would ever be the same again. Before I continue, let me know in the comments where you're listening from, and don't forget to like and subscribe if family betrayal stories speak to you. My name is Elaine Porter. I'm 35, a financial advisor by trade, and in my family, I've always been the one they leaned on. If someone needed a loan co-signer, if a cousin got stranded late at night, if my parents needed someone to organize their medical paperwork, I was the name on speed dial. I never asked for that role, but it was placed on me like an invisible crown, one that looked responsible from the outside, but carried a heavy weight. Rachel was different. She was the dreamer, the kind who never finished a project, but always knew how to make her life look beautiful in photos. Growing up, our parents adored Rachel's free spirit, just as much as they relied on my steady hand. They would smile at her impulsive decisions and shake their heads, trusting I'd be there to help her when things fell apart. It didn't bother me much when we were kids, but as adults, it became harder to ignore. When Rachel introduced Derek, I tried to give him a fair chance. He was charming, the kind of man who looked good shaking hands at a family reunion, but his compliments always carried sharp edges, little barbs hidden behind his smile. He would call me impressive for living such a simple life, as if stability were a failure to aspire to more. I noticed his eyes lingered longer than his words, and it unsettled me in ways I couldn't explain. Still, Rachel was in love. Hopelessly, recklessly in love. She posted photos of their date nights, their weekend trips, their bright smiles under fairy lights. My parents welcomed him, easily convinced that Rachel had finally found her match. I held my doubts close, swallowing them for the sake of peace. After all, wasn't that what the responsible one was supposed to do? Everything seemed to fall into place when they announced they'd found their dream home. A sleek, modern place with wide windows and space for a future family. At least, that's how Rachel described it, her voice bright with excitement. But their finances didn't match their ambitions. The bank wasn't willing to approve the mortgage on their combined income. That was when Rachel turned to me, sliding into the booth across from me at a little cafe, her hands shaking with hope. "Elaine, we just need your help as guarantor," she said, her eyes searching mine. "Please, this is the one." Her words hit me harder than I expected. Signing onto a house wasn't just a signature. It was a chain tying my future to theirs. My instincts told me to say no to protect myself, but then I remembered the little sister who used to crawl into my bed when storms scared her. I remembered braiding her hair before her first high school dance. Against my better judgment, I told her I'd think about it. That night, I didn't sleep. I stared at the ceiling, torn between the voice that urged caution and the bond that whispered loyalty. By morning, I knew I needed advice. I paid for a lawyer to look at the agreement, and his words stuck with me: when family and money mix, only clarity keeps you safe. He suggested a side agreement, just a single page that would protect me if things ever went wrong. At the time, it felt almost ridiculous, but I agreed. It was signed, notarized, and tucked away, and for the first time, I felt a little safer. Rachel laughed it off, teasing me for being too formal, but I let her laugh. She had no idea how much I was already risking for her happiness. And yet, even as I handed over my support, something inside me shivered. I knew Derek's smile was a mask. I knew Rachel was blinded by love. I had given them the key to their dream, but I couldn't shake the sense that I had just chained myself to a nightmare waiting to happen. That unease lingered unspoken but heavy until the day of the family barbecue when Derek leaned just a little too close and everything I feared began to take shape. The barbecue fell on one of those golden Sunday afternoons when the world seemed simple and kind. The air carried the scent of charcoal and grilled corn, mingling with the laughter of children running barefoot through the grass. Relatives filled the yard, voices layered over one another in cheerful noise, and for a little while, it felt like every other family gathering we had ever known. My father debated sports with an uncle. My mother fussed over the dessert table, and Rachel glowed as she showed off a new summer dress. I tried to let myself be carried by the warmth of it, as if nothing in our lives was complicated. I was leaning against the deck railing, chatting idly with a cousin, when I felt Derek slide in too close. His cologne was sharp, almost medicinal, and it wrapped around me before his voice did. "You're always so serious, Elaine," he said, smiling with that polished charm he wore like a mask. "You should loosen up, have some fun once in a while." His hand lingered on my forearm just long enough for the air to change his thumb, brushing the edge of my sleeve as if daring me to notice. I forced a laugh that sounded thin even to my own ears. I muttered something about needing another drink and slipped away into the kitchen, my pulse ticking uncomfortably in my throat. By the time I filled a cup with iced tea, I had already decided not to mention it. Rachel was glowing, my parents were happy, and I told myself it was nothing more than Derek's misguided idea of humor. But deep down, I felt the unease settle like a stone at the bottom of a pond. 2 days later, my phone vibrated on the nightstand with a message so long it filled the screen in jagged bursts. Rachel's words cut sharper than any blade. "How could you? Derek told me everything. He said you've been making him uncomfortable for months, and at the barbecue you crossed the line. You told him he deserved better than me, that he should be with a real woman." "Stay away from us, Elaine. I don't even know who you are anymore." I read the message 3 times, my stomach hollowing with each pass. It wasn't confusion, it was an ambush rehearsed and cruel. The accusations were too detailed to be born from a misunderstanding. Derek had built a story brick by brick, and Rachel had swallowed it whole. I called her immediately, but the line went to voicemail. I tried again and again until I sat on the edge of my bed, staring at the phone, realizing she wasn't going to pick up. The silence that followed pressed against me heavier than rage. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. Instead, I felt something colder, sharper, a clarity that came when there was nothing left to lose. If Rachel and Derek wanted me out of their lives, they couldn't keep me tethered to theirs financially. I went to the cabinet where I kept important documents and pulled out the thin folder, the one with the notarized agreement. There it was, black and white, the clause about good faith and defamation written in my lawyer's steady hand. What had once seemed like overkill now stared back at me like prophecy. My voice was calm when I called the bank the next morning. Due to a breach of personal trust, I said I am formally withdrawing as guarantor on Rachel Porter and Derek Jameson's mortgage application. The pause on the other end stretched before the banker responded, surprised. "Ms. Porter, you understand this will almost certainly result in their loan being denied." I closed my eyes, steadying myself. "I'm aware." When I hung up, the quiet of my apartment felt different. For years, I had carried everyone else's burdens, always stepping in when asked. Now, for the first time, I had stepped away. Relief flickered in me, but it was shadowed by another truth. Rachel hadn't just asked for distance. She had branded me an enemy, and with one decision, I had pulled the foundation out from under her dream. 3 nights later, the pounding at my door rattled through the apartment. I froze, toothbrush still in my mouth, heart lurching at the sound. Through the peephole, Rachel stood with her hair tangled, and eyes red-rimmed, Derek looming just behind her with arms crossed. I opened the door cautiously, but Rachel pushed inside before I could speak. "What did you do?" she demanded, her voice raw with panic. Derek followed slowly, his gaze sweeping across my living room as though he owned the place. I leaned against the wall, arms folded. "Exactly what you told me to do," I said quietly. "I'm staying away." Rachel's face crumpled. "The bank called. They denied the loan. They said you withdrew Elaine, you torpedoed everything. Our house, our future." Derek's tone was clipped, calculated when he cut in. "This isn't just about us. You cost us our deposit. You sabotaged Rachel's dream." A strange calm settled over me. "Are you serious? You accuse me of trying to seduce your fiancé? Tell me to disappear from your lives, and you can't understand why I wouldn't co-sign a 6-figure loan." Rachel's lips trembled. "That was personal stuff. We were upset. Couples fight, sisters fight. You don't ruin someone's future over words said in anger." I laughed, then bitter and sharp. "A fight is over who forgot to buy milk. This was a public execution, and you co-signed it without a single question." Derek's phone buzzed on the coffee table with his mother's name flashing on the screen. He ignored it and stepped closer, lowering his voice. "You can still fix this. Call the bank. Tell them you overreacted. Make it right." Rachel reached for my hand, her grip desperate. "Please, you're my sister. Don't let one mistake destroy us." For a flicker of a moment, I saw her not as the furious woman in front of me, but as the little girl who once begged me to braid her hair before school dances. Then I remembered the message, "Stay away from us. I don't even know who you are anymore." I pulled my hand free. "No. The decision is final. I'm not a switch you flip on and off when convenient. You don't get to treat me like a predator and a bank in the same week." Derek's mask slipped and his voice turned cold. "So you're really going to let your sister lose everything?" Out of spite. I held his gaze. "No, out of survival. Your dream became my nightmare." "Derek, you lit the fire. I'm just walking out of the smoke." Rachel's sob cracked the air as she stormed toward the door, clutching her purse. Derek followed, but not before turning back with a look that promised this wasn't finished. The slam of the door echoed through the apartment, rattling the picture frames on the wall. I slid to the floor, my back against the wall, the silence pressing in once again. Minutes later, my phone rang. It was my mother, her voice sharp and familiar with guilt. "Elaine, what did you do to your sister? Families are supposed to work things through." "Rachel is devastated." I closed my eyes, exhausted. "Mom, she was given a choice between me and a lie. She chose the lie." There was nothing on the line for several seconds, only the sound of my mother's heavy sigh. But I didn't waver. Something inside me had shifted permanently. For the first time in my life, I wasn't the safety net. I was done. Still, whispers travel fast in families. Within a week, I began to notice the shift: cousins who avoided eye contact, an aunt who stopped sending recipes, friends who grew quiet. Derek had gone on the offensive, painting me as jealous, bitter, unstable. Rachel repeated his narrative in shaky tones, crying to relatives who were eager to believe. The story spread like smoke filling rooms I hadn't stepped into. And even as I stood on solid ground, I knew the next storm was coming, one I hadn't yet prepared for. The whispers began as little shifts in familiar voices, nothing anyone said outright at first. A cousin who usually greeted me warmly turned her head away at a grocery store. An aunt, the one who always sent me recipes clipped from magazines, suddenly left my messages unanswered. Family dinners felt colder, the laughter muted when I entered the room. Derek's version of events was spreading, and Rachel, tearful on the phone to anyone who would listen, repeated his story until it began to sound like truth. According to them, I was jealous, unstable, unable to handle seeing my sister happy. Derek was the loyal fiancé, bravely standing by her through my supposed betrayal. The worst part wasn't the rumors, it was how easily people believed them. Even Maya noticed the change. She read a text one evening from a mutual friend who wrote, "Are you safe at home? Is Elaine okay?" Her hands trembled as she read it aloud. "They're making it sound like you're dangerous," she whispered, furious but shaken. I wanted to believe it would blow over, that silence would speak for me when I had no words left. But then came the letter. It arrived by certified mail, thick with the weight of legal threat, the kind that makes your stomach clench before you even open it. Inside was a demand from Weston and Hale, LLP, the firm representing Derek and Rachel. They accused me of interfering with their building contract, demanded that I reinstate my guarantee, and even claimed I owed them compensation for their lost deposit and emotional distress. I sat in my car outside the office, reading the pages again and again until the words blurred. My chest tightened, the panic rising like water too fast to breathe against. I had thought withdrawing would free me, but now it seemed I had only stepped into another trap. For a brief, dangerous moment, I considered giving in, calling the bank, reinstating the guarantee, anything to stop the noise. That was when Maya slid into the passenger seat, her scrub still creased from her shift. She saw the letter clutched in my hands and pulled it gently away. Her eyes narrowed as she scanned the lines, her expression hardening. "They're bluffing," she said firmly. "People don't get to slander you and then sue you for not giving them money. Did they even tell their lawyer the whole story?" Her words cut through the fog. I thought of the notarized page waiting in my drawer at home, the clause about good faith and defamation. Derek and Rachel had broken it the moment Rachel sent that message. My hands steadied as I drove us home, a plan taking shape without me even fully realizing it. That night, I pulled the folder from its place, smoothed the single page against the table, and read it slowly, line by line. There it was, clear as daylight. "Any act of defamation or malicious falsehood shall constitute grounds for immediate withdrawal." Rachel's text still glowed in my memory, her words an exact breach of what she had signed. I scanned the agreement attached, the screenshot of her message, circled the timestamp, and built a neat, undeniable packet of truth. But I didn't send it to their lawyer. I sent it to my parents. The subject line was plain. The full story. The body of the email was short. No explanations, no pleas. Just Mom. "Dad, you asked why I did this. Attached is the signed agreement and Rachel's text. She and Derek broke the terms before I ever called the bank. I didn't do this out of spite. I did it to protect myself. I'm sorry you're caught in the middle." Then I pressed send and sat in silence, waiting for a storm that might never come. 48 hours passed. No reply, no phone calls, only a silence that stretched long enough to feel like rejection. I convinced myself I had made a mistake, that they would dismiss the documents as legal jargon, that they would double down on siding with Rachel. I prepared myself for the kind of loneliness that only family can carve into you. Then my phone rang. It was my father. His voice was different. No sharpness, no accusation. Just wait. "Elaine, we got your email," he said. "Your mother and I read everything." He hesitated, then asked, "Why didn't Rachel tell us she signed something like that? Because she probably forgot." I answered softly, "And because it proves she and Derek were in the wrong." He exhaled heavily. "She's coming over tonight. We're going to talk." Later, I would hear about that conversation secondhand from my mother, but I can still picture it as if I were sitting at the table. My father laid the papers in front of Rachel, the signed clause, the text message, each piece of evidence neatly stacked. My mother sat beside him, her hands clasped tight in her lap. "Rachel," my father said, his voice calm but unyielding. "Explain this." Rachel tried to hold her ground at first. She sputtered excuses, said I was twisting things, claimed Derek had misunderstood. Derek, ever the smooth talker, leaned in to take over, calling it all a miscommunication, a family misunderstanding, blown out of proportion. But my father wasn't a man easily swayed by charm. He tapped the page with his finger. "This is your signature. This is your text. You broke the agreement. Tell me why." The silence stretched long enough for the weight of it to sink in. Rachel's bravado faltered, her eyes filling with tears. Finally, her words came out in broken gasps. "It wasn't supposed to go this far. Derek said if we made some distance, Elaine wouldn't interfere so much with money, and we'd still get the house. He told me she'd be upset we'd fight, but then it would settle. We'd have our dream." She looked down at the papers, her voice shaking. "I never thought she'd actually pull the plug." My mother's voice broke as she spoke. "How could you? She's your sister. How could you do this to our family? How could you do this to her? Rachel!" sobbed the sound, hollow and defeated. Derek tried once more to frame himself as the protector, the loyal man trying to hold things together. But it was too late. The house was gone, the deposit lost, and the truth laid bare. The lines had been crossed too far for anyone to pretend otherwise. From that night forward, things shifted. The legal threats evaporated, Derek's confidence cracked, and Rachel's defenses collapsed under the weight of her own admission. But even in my vindication, there was no joy. I didn't feel triumphant hearing about their unraveling. It felt like ashes in my mouth watching my sister fall apart under the truth, and my mother cry as though she had lost us both. What I did feel, though, was something sturdier than relief. The story Derek had woven so carefully was beginning to fray, and for once, I wasn't the one left holding the broken pieces together. Yet even as the truth settled, the damage wasn't finished. Holidays would come, invitations would change, and not everyone was ready to let go of Derek's story. I knew whispers would linger long after signatures and evidence had spoken. And I knew, too, that Rachel and Derek weren't done trying to salvage what was slipping through their fingers. When my father told me he and my mother had confronted Rachel with the agreement and the text, I thought maybe the worst had passed. Derek's charm had finally faltered in front of hard evidence, and Rachel had confessed enough to reveal the truth. But even with my parents standing in my corner, the silence from the rest of the family was deafening. Aunts, cousins, even friends who had been part of our lives for years still treated me with suspicion, as though the lies Derek had spun were more believable than the signatures beneath a notary's stamp. Holidays became heavy with tension. I walked into rooms where conversations fell quiet, where smiles thinned and drifted away. At Thanksgiving, my cousin Laura couldn't meet my eyes when she passed the potatoes. At Christmas, an uncle asked me in a too polite tone if I was feeling better these days. The words were sharp in their softness, meant to sound concerned, but carrying Derek's narrative underneath. I sat through those dinners with my head held steady, refusing to give anyone the satisfaction of seeing me break. Maya was my anchor through it all. She listened to my late-night unraveling when I whispered fears that maybe truth didn't matter as much as the story people wanted to believe. She reminded me of what I held in my hands, the contract, the message, the simple facts. Still, even her steady arms couldn't fully protect me from the sting of watching my reputation fray. Friends I had known for years hesitated now, unsure which version of me was real. What Rachel and Derek hadn't realized, though, was that by forcing me into this corner, they awakened something I had buried for years. I had always been the one to carry weight, to clean up messes, to sacrifice. Now, with nothing left to lose, I could finally see clearly. They had built their dream on my back, and they had shattered my name to protect themselves. The realization burned, but it also gave me a steadiness I hadn't known before. It showed itself one evening when I came home to another envelope taped to my door. This one wasn't from their lawyers. It was a card unsigned, but the handwriting was Rachel's. Inside, 3 short lines. "We didn't mean for it to end like this. Please don't make it worse." I stood in the entryway, reading it over and over, feeling the hollowness of the words. It wasn't an apology. It wasn't even an acknowledgement of what they had done. It was a plea for me to stay quiet, to carry the burden again, as I always had. I tore it in half and dropped it into the trash. The breaking point came not with Rachel, but with Derek. A few weeks later, I saw him outside my office building, leaning against his car, as though waiting for me. His smile was tight, the kind he used when charm had worn thin. "Elaine," he said, stepping toward me. "We don't have to keep fighting. You and I both know this can be fixed." I shifted my bag on my shoulder, keeping my voice even. "There's nothing to fix, Derek. You lied, and Rachel chose to believe you. I'm not going to shoulder the blame for that." His eyes hardened. "You think this ends with some piece of paper?" "People believe me, Elaine. They'll keep believing me. You'll be the one remembered as bitter, not us." Something inside me settled as he spoke, not fear, not anger, clarity. "Then let them," I said quietly. "Because when the truth comes out, and it always does, you'll be standing alone." I walked past him without looking back, the sound of my own footsteps steadier than his words. That night, I sat at the kitchen table with Maya, the contract spread between us again. I traced the signatures with my finger, the notary stamp pressed firm into the page. It wasn't just a legal shield anymore. It was a reminder that I had protected myself when no one else would. For years, I had lived as the family's safety net, the one who caught everyone else before they hit the ground. But the truth was plain now. I couldn't be their net and survive myself. It was in that quiet moment that I understood this wasn't just about Derek's lies or Rachel's betrayal. It was about me choosing not to disappear under the weight of their story. I didn't need to fight with shouting or accusations. I only needed to stand steady, let the truth hold its ground, and wait for their own choices to collapse beneath them. The weeks that followed were filled with uneasy calm. Rachel stopped calling my parents daily, her voice growing brittle whenever she did. Derek appeared less at family gatherings, his name spoken with careful pauses. But the damage lingered. Cousins still avoided me. Family friends still whispered. It didn't matter. I had reached the point where I no longer needed their approval. For the first time in years, I felt the shape of my own strength. The clarity of knowing where I ended and where Rachel's chaos began. And with that clarity came the calm decision to wait, to let the cracks in their foundation widen without my hand pushing them. Because I could see it now, as clearly as the ink on the page Derek and Rachel had built their life on, lies, and lies don't stand for long. It was only a matter of time before the walls they leaned against finally gave way. The quiet weeks after Derek cornered me outside my office only deepened the rift within the family. I tried to carry on with my work, my clients, and my life with Maya, but the whispers never stopped. Relatives who once confided in me now kept their distance, and friends I had grown up with were careful in their words, as if unsure whether to believe Derek's version or mine. Even at Sunday dinner with my parents, the air felt strained, though they stood by me. It was as if the very fabric of my family had been split in 2 threads, fraying at every tug. I told myself it didn't matter, but when Maya read another message from one of her friends asking if she felt safe living with me, The anger simmered in her voice. "They make you sound unstable," she said, tossing her phone onto the couch. "How can they twist things like this and face people without shame?" I didn't answer right away. Instead, I walked to the cabinet, pulled out the folder, and set the contract on the table between us. The bold print of the clause stared back at me, every line a reminder that I hadn't imagined any of it. I began gathering the pieces into something tighter, something undeniable. I scanned the agreement, added Rachel's text, and circled the date. I even compiled emails, timestamps, and copies of the threatening letter from their attorney. Each page went into a neatly labeled file. I wasn't preparing for court yet. I didn't want it to come to that, but I was preparing to protect myself from every angle. If Derek wanted to smear my name, he wouldn't find me defenseless. It wasn't long before Rachel tried again to reach me, though not directly. At a cousin's birthday party, Laura pulled me aside in the kitchen. She looked uncomfortable, her eyes darting toward the living room where Rachel sat laughing too loudly. "Elaine," she whispered, "Rachel wants to talk to you. She says you won't answer her calls." I held my cup steady, choosing my words carefully. "Rachel has my number, Laura. If she wants to talk, she can start with the truth." Laura hesitated, then sighed, her voice dropping lower. "She says Derek told her it was all a misunderstanding, that you overreacted. She thinks if you would just call the bank again, everything could go back to normal." The words settled heavy in the kitchen air. "Back to normal," I repeated softly. Normal had been me carrying her burdens, ignoring Derek's cutting remarks, swallowing my doubts. Normal had been me sacrificing while Rachel floated through life believing someone else would fix her mistakes. That world was gone, and there was no return. When the party ended, I drove home in silence, Maya's hand resting gently over mine on the console. The headlights lit the road ahead, and I realized something important. For years, I had been waiting for peace to come from outside, from Rachel's maturity, from Derek's respect, from my family's recognition. But the truth was that peace could only come from me choosing not to bend anymore. The first real test of that choice came when another envelope arrived, this one less formal than the first. It was handwritten, the paper cheap and folded unevenly. Inside was a note in Rachel's shaky handwriting. "Elaine, I didn't mean for it to go this far. I miss you. Can't we talk?" There was no acknowledgement of the lies, no apology for the slander, only a plea to reset everything without facing the damage. I set the letter on the counter and stared at it for a long time. Part of me wanted to reach for the phone to hear her voice, to believe there was a way back. But then I remembered her text, sharp and final. "Stay away from us. I don't even know who you are anymore." I folded the note, slipped it back into the envelope, and placed it in the same folder with the contract and the letters. Not as reconciliation, but as evidence, another page in the story they had written themselves. In the weeks that followed, Derek's tactics grew sharper. He stopped relying on family whispers and began spreading rumors in the community. A client pulled me aside after a meeting, her tone hesitant. "I heard you've been going through something," she said gently. "I just want you to know, I trust you." Her kindness steadied me, but it also revealed how far Derek's reach had stretched. He wasn't content with tearing me down within the family. He wanted me diminished everywhere. That night, I sat with Maya at the kitchen table again, the folder open between us. "He's trying to paint me as unstable," I said quietly, "but I'm not going to let him rewrite my story." Maya met my eyes, her expression fierce but tender. "Then don't fight him on his terms," she said. "Show the truth piece by piece, and let it stand where lies can't." So that's what I did. I drafted a timeline, every date, every document, every message woven into a clear record. I wasn't sure yet when or how I would use it, but the act of laying it out was enough to anchor me. For the first time, I wasn't reacting to Derek's lies. I was preparing for the day when they would collapse under their own weight. And in that quiet work, I found something I hadn't felt in months. Strength. Not the kind that comes from shouting or proving yourself in the moment, but the kind that comes from knowing you've already built your foundation and it will hold. I didn't know then when or how the breaking point would come. But I felt it in the air, in the way Rachel's laughter sounded brittle, in the way Derek's charm thinned each time he was forced to repeat his story. Their house of cards was swaying, and I had only to stand steady and let gravity take its course. Because I understood now, my revenge didn't need to be loud. It only needed to be patient. And patience, finally, was mine. The breaking point didn't arrive with a scream or a slammed door. It came quietly through a phone call from my father. His voice was weary, like the weight of months had settled into his chest. "Elaine," he said, "your mother and I want you to come over tonight. Rachel will be here. It's time we lay everything out." I almost refused. The thought of sitting across from Rachel with Derek at her side made my stomach turn. But something in my father's tone, firm, unyielding, told me this wasn't another family discussion where feelings would override facts. So that evening, I walked into my parents' house, the air thick with anticipation. My mother sat at the kitchen table, her hands clasped tight, and my father stood behind her, a stack of papers already laid out. Rachel was there, eyes rimmed with red, and Derek beside her, arms folded as if he owned the room. No one wasted time on pleasantries. My father tapped the stack of papers with one finger. "These," he said, "are the agreement Elaine had you sign the text you sent her and the letter from your lawyer. Explain this, Rachel." His voice didn't rise, but it carried the weight of finality. Rachel's lips parted, but the words that came out were brittle. "Dad, you don't understand. Derek told me." Derek leaned forward, ready to smooth the air with his rehearsed charm. "Mr. Porter, this has all been blown out of proportion. Elaine misinterpreted everything and Rachel got upset. Families fight. We shouldn't let this ruin." My father's palm came down on the table, not loud, but enough to stop Derek mid-sentence. "Don't talk to me like I don't understand, son. This is your fiancé's signature. This is her message. These are facts, not stories." He slid the papers across the table toward Rachel. "So, tell me why." Rachel's bravado lasted only a moment. Her eyes filled, and the tears spilled before she could stop them. "It wasn't supposed to go this far," she whispered. "Derek said if we made some distance, Elaine wouldn't interfere so much. He told me she'd be upset, but it would settle and we'd still get the house." Her voice cracked, her hands twisting in her lap. I never thought she'd actually pull out. My mother's face crumpled, her voice breaking. "She's your sister, Rachel. She's carried this family on her back for years. How could you turn on her like this?" Rachel sobbed openly now, shoulders shaking, but Derek's expression didn't soften. He reached for her hand, his jaw tight, his eyes darting toward me with a look that held no remorse. For the first time, I saw what my parents were finally seeing too, the mask slipping the man who cared only about control, not about truth. The silence in that kitchen stretched long. My father leaned back slowly, his voice low but steady. "This stops now. No more lies, no more lawyers, no more poison in this family. If you want to rebuild trust, it won't be on Elaine's shoulders, it'll be on yours." Rachel buried her face in her hands, but Derek pushed back his chair, his voice clipped. "We'll handle this ourselves." He stood tugging at Rachel's arm, but she resisted, her body heavy with defeat. My father didn't move to stop them as Derek stormed toward the door. My mother simply closed her eyes, as if the sound of that door slamming was the only punctuation left to give. Later that night, my father called me into the living room after Rachel and Derek left. He lowered himself into his chair with a sigh, staring at the fire that had burned low in the grate. "Elaine," he said quietly, "I owe you an apology. We should have seen through this sooner. We should have protected you, instead of letting it get this far." I wanted to tell him it was all right, that I understood, but the truth sat heavy between us. Nothing could erase the months of whispers, the looks, the weight of being cast as the villain. I simply knotted my throat too tight for words. Word spread quickly after that night. My parents didn't keep the confrontation a secret. When relatives asked, my father showed them the documents. The whispers didn't disappear completely, but they shifted, no longer pointed like knives at me. Some cousins apologized, others stayed silent, but the tide had turned. Derek and Rachel were no longer the golden couple. They were the ones who had built their future on lies and lost it all. But victory didn't feel like triumph. It felt like standing in the ashes of something once whole, knowing it would never be put back together the same way again. I saw Rachel once more that week when she came to my parents' house alone. She looked smaller, her shoulders hunched, her eyes swollen. She tried to meet my gaze, but I held steady, waiting. "Elaine," she whispered, "I'm sorry. I don't know how to fix this." The silence between us said what I couldn't. Some wounds cut too deep to be healed by words. I turned away first, leaving her to my parents' care. On the drive home, the city lights blurred past the windshield, and Maya reached across the console, her hand warm in mine. "You don't have to carry her anymore," she said softly. For the first time in months, I believed her. Still, even with the confrontation behind us, I knew it wasn't over. Rachel and Derek's house was gone, their deposit lost, and their relationship cracking under the pressure. But broken people don't always surrender quietly. And Derek's last look across that table told me he wasn't finished. The weeks after that confrontation at my parents' house revealed the full cost of Rachel and Derek's choices. Their mortgage was gone, their deposit lost, and with it, the glossy dream they had paraded on social media. The picture-perfect couple began to look more like two people trapped in a shrinking frame. Through relatives, I heard the stories, resentment simmering at every dinner, blame seeping into every conversation, silences stretching longer than laughter. What had once been effortless charm between them had soured into sharp remarks and restless nights. Some family members finally admitted they had believed Derek too easily. A few cousins called to apologize, their voices hesitant, almost embarrassed. But others clung to the version Derek had spun, whispering at gatherings that I had ruined Rachel's future out of spite. The shift was uneven, like a tide pulling in two directions at once, and holidays became careful negotiations of who would attend which house and who would pretend not to notice the empty chairs. At work, I noticed the difference too. A client who had once avoided me after Derek's rumors reached out to schedule a meeting, her tone warmer, more trusting. It wasn't an outright acknowledgement, but it was a step back toward the credibility I had nearly lost. Still, I carried the scars. Even with the truth exposed, some doubts refused to die. I could see it in the way certain friends hesitated before calling. The way neighbors paused a second longer before offering a greeting. Lies once told leave stains that facts can't fully scrub away. Maya never wavered. She cut ties with friends who continued to side with Derek and Rachel, refusing to let their poison bleed into our lives. At night, when the weight of it pressed too heavy, she held me close and reminded me that I hadn't done this to myself. She was angry on my behalf, but she was also tired, weary of how far the ripples reached. "It's not fair," she said one evening as we washed dishes. You told the truth. They're the ones who lied. Why should you be the one carrying this? I didn't answer because I knew she was right. Fairness had never been part of this story. Word eventually reached me that Derek had tried to pick up where he left off, convincing Rachel that the house could still be theirs, that another lender might overlook the mess. But lenders talk, and their names were already marked by a failed loan and a lost deposit. The dream had slipped, and now they were stuck in a cramped apartment shadows of the couple who once spun in circles planning where to place a Christmas tree. I caught sight of them once at the grocery store. Rachel looked pale. Her smile strained her cart half empty. Derek trailed behind, scrolling through his phone, his jaw tight. They didn't notice me, but I noticed the distance between them, a space that hadn't been there before. That was their punishment, I realized, not anything I had done, but the life they had destroyed for themselves. And yet, I didn't feel triumphant. Watching Rachel unravel wasn't a victory. Seeing my mother cry as if she had lost one daughter to lies and another to silence didn't feel like justice. It felt like standing in ruins knowing no one had won. But I also knew I couldn't go back. Too much had been said, too much trust shattered. Some fractures never heal, and trying to force them together only leaves sharper edges. Then one night, long after I stopped expecting it, my phone lit up with a number I didn't recognize. The message was short. I know it's not enough, but I'm sorry for everything. I didn't need to ask who it was. Rachel's voice lived in the words. I stared at the screen for a long time, my thumb hovering over the keyboard. I typed a reply, then deleted it. I tried again, softer this time, but erased that too. In the end, I turned the phone face down on the nightstand. Some wounds can't be sealed by apologies. Some betrayals cut deep enough that words arrive too late. Lying in the dark beside Maya, listening to her steady breathing, I whispered the truth to myself. Rachel was still my sister, and a part of me would always love her in some unreachable corner of my heart. But love doesn't erase lies, and forgiveness doesn't rebuild what has been broken beyond repair. I had survived the storm, but survival didn't mean everything would return to how it once was. It meant learning to live in the quiet afterward with dignity intact, even if scars remained. And it meant preparing myself for the final step, the moment when I would close the door on this chapter, not with anger, but with the steadiness I had earned. Because justice had already been served, Derek and Rachel had lost the life they tried to build on my back. What remained now was closure, and closure I knew would come only from me. The storm had passed, but the echoes lingered. Derek and Rachel had lost their house, their deposit, and the shine that once dazzled everyone around them. They were left in a small apartment with walls too close for comfort. Their resentments pressed against one another until silence became their sharpest weapon. That was their justice, not by my hand, but by the truth, unraveling what they had built on lies. For me, survival didn't look like triumph. It looked like walking into family gatherings with my head steady, even when conversations shortened and some cousins still looked at me with doubt. It looked like setting boundaries I had never dared before, refusing to be the person everyone leaned on while my own shoulders buckled. And most of all, it looked like choosing my peace over their chaos, knowing I didn't have to carry what wasn't mine. My parents found their footing again. My father was quiet but firm in reminding relatives of the truth, and my mother, though grieved by what had unfolded between her daughters, stopped asking me to bend for the sake of family harmony. It wasn't perfect. Holidays were smaller, lighter, and sometimes a little lonelier, but they were honest, and honesty was worth more to me than crowded tables built on pretense. Rachel's message of apology still sits in my phone unanswered. Maybe one day I'll know what to do with it. For now, it's enough to let it be a reminder that forgiveness and reconciliation are not the same thing. I can still love her from a distance, still remember the girl who once trusted me with secrets and bedtime fears without opening myself up to be betrayed again. Some ties remain, but looser, more fragile, shaped by survival rather than expectation. Maya has been my constant through it all. She reminded me again and again that my worth wasn't defined by the lies others told or the weight I carried for too long. Together, we built new routines, ones that weren't shadowed by family drama. We laughed again, planted a small garden, planned trips, without waiting for permission from anyone. Life moved forward not perfectly, but fully. Looking back now, I see it clearly. Justice wasn't about revenge in the way people imagine. It wasn't about dramatic takedowns or loud victories. It was about standing firm when every force pushed me to give in. It was about holding my dignity even when others tried to strip it away. In the end, Derek and Rachel collapsed under the weight of their own choices, and I walked away lighter because I finally chose myself. If there's anything to take from my story, it's this. When trust breaks, it may never return whole, and that's all right. Some contracts, written or unspoken, cannot be repaired. But you can still reclaim your place in the world. You can still protect your peace. And sometimes the most powerful act of justice is not to fight louder, but to step back, let the truth breathe, and watch the lies fall apart on their own. Before we close, I'd love to know what part of this journey spoke most to you. Share your thoughts in the comments, and if you'd like to hear more true family stories, stay connected here.